Good morning. It's me, Huey. Um, yeah, it's Ricky and Ginger, your Duke A number one, your friend to your pets. So we got like a boatload of people this morning, which is always cool. Of course, I am joined by my stalwart companion, the Frodo to my Samwise Gamgee, the the Brock Sampson to my Rusty Venture. It's Matthew.
Hello.
Matthew, how are you this morning?
Oh, pretty good. Pretty good. I've got a hard out at 11. I've got to go do a family lunch thing. But other than that,
Ooh, what are you doing for family lunch?
we're just going to go to Spitz. I don't know. My sister's in town. So
Spike? I don't know what Spitz is, but it sounds
it's like spit things on Spitz. So, like
Oh, I do love things on Spitz. Meat
Euros.
on stick also makes
Fun name. I get it.
I was like, I hope this isn't a place where they spit in your food.
I was just thinking like a guy named Spitz, like
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mr. Timothy Spitz.
I mean, I'm not going to yuck anybody's yum if you want to go and get your food spat in, whatever.
No, I don't, and I don't
make sure that it stays on your plate.
Yeah.
Right. Well, yeah, I'm not going.
Doggy.
If there's a market for that, I'm not going to begrudge anybody.
Yeah, I mean, get in where you fit in, son.
Yeah, maybe in a public restaurant though is not the best place.
No.
Food on Spitz though. I mean, I don't think there's ever anything wrong with food in various in its meats and their meats and veggies in their various forms, like in tube form, on stick, on spit. Yeah, I mean, last night we watched a guy making his famous, like a former food truck guy who's a chef making his famous grilled cheese and his tomato basil soup. And I was like, I really wanted to watch it because I kind of like this cooking guy. He's just kind of a normal dude, and he walks you through everything. And his soup was like 8 vegetables roasted and then blended down to a smooth consistency. Cassandra kept going, that's not tomato soup. That's not tomato soup. That's not tomato. And then when it was all blended down, she was like, I'd eat that. I was like, this is the only way for me to get you to eat vegetables, not to roast them and not to pulverize them into a pulp where you don't know what they are. And she was like, yeah, pretty much. And I was like, that's
I'm the same way though. I'm virtually the same way. I just have a thing with texture.
It's such a good way to like get those complex flavors and also to like get people to eat certain things they may not realize they're eating, and then realize that, oh, I do like you said, I may not like the texture, but I like the flavor.
Yeah, I really don't like raw veggies.
I grew up on raw veggies, baby.
It's like the combination. It's like the stringy crunch. It feels like I'm chewing on chalk, and I don't like it. And
yeah,
I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, vegetables are gross.
That's my wife. She doesn't think they're gross. She just doesn't want to eat them.
It would be much easier for me to eat more healthily if I liked them, but I really, really don't like them. Because the other thing is, I have an extra sensitive palate to bitter flavors, and so like the astringent aftertaste of a lot of vegetables really just does them in for me too, which is like
really. I like that stuff.
I don't like tea or tea or beer or coffee either for the same reason. So
now we just can't get along at all.
Yeah, I just bitterness and me do not get along whatsoever.
No, I mean I get it. It's just I do enjoy bitterness.
Oh yeah. I mean I have some friends who are like that too. Who are like, oh, my favorite kind of beer is an IPA, and I'm like, I don't like any of it. So.
Yeah, I have my taste for beer.
Yeah, I've never.
Oh, Matt, you're getting called out in the chat. You bean hating son of a.
Hey,
I put the YouTube.
Tomato soup and grilled cheese is a good pick, though.
I put the link of the guy in the chat, so if anyone's interested, because the grilled cheese looked good too. It had bacon and tomato in it. I was like, that's interesting. And
tomato soup
blend of cheeses.
Tomato soup and a grilled cheese is one of my favorite little foods. It's simple, super easy to make. make it really really quickly too. Because if I'm making food for myself, I don't like to spend more than like 30 minutes doing it.
A little more upscale, especially with the cheeses he uses. But it's like, again, it's like we were talking.
I'm into that.
He walks through like why he had to use certain cheeses in the food truck because of cost. He was like, I would have loved to use cheddar, but cheddar be expensive.
Sure.
So here's what I used instead that gave similar flavor and similar consistency, but also did not bankrupt.
Provolone is a good sandwich cheese.
Mike, welcome back. By the way, I didn't even finish introducing everybody. We got enough food talk.
I'm back today.
He's back, baby. Also back is the other part of the St. Cloud experience. Brian. This is what they're calling you guys is the St. Cloud experience, which sounds like a beautiful, like late 70s, early 80s wrestling tag team name.
Yes.
On the same card as like the Alabama Doink.
Don't look up Alabama Doink on Urban Dictionary.
Do not. You will be scarred.
I don't know.
I think the real question is, are we ever on topic? Which I would say occasionally. Also, I want to put one more thing in the chat. We were talking about it before we went on live. Is a friend of mine who I eventually want to get to come on. This is his website. Highly recommend his stuff. Great human being. I'm wearing one of his shirts right now, which is got John Brown in the Che Guevara style. It's my friend, award-winning artist Stephen Gilpin. He's done the art for Banuncula, for Artemis Fowl, for all kinds of interesting things. He's got his own comic strip called Lestergians. Super cool dude. A lot of the things that I'm into, and a lot of just who I am comes from us growing up like a block apart and our families being super tight. So super cool guy. Check his stuff out. I think he might still be doing t-shirts. If he is, this t-shirt, and then he has another one that I have upstairs that I wish I wouldn't have got it in white. It's an astronaut who's got the full astronaut suit on, but inside the domed helmet is a skull smoking a cigarette, and I'm just like, it's an amazing looking shirt.
That's a cool shirt.
But it's, for me, I got it in white because of my size. I think it was the only shirt available, and I can never wear it because the moment I wear it, I'm going to stain the shit out of it.
I'm the same way with white. I can't wear white.
I'm a sloppy boy.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like half the reason you wear clothes is so that you can function while you wear them. If you have to sit completely still while you're wearing clothes.
I mean, just earlier before we went on stream, I had coffee on my shirt because drinking. Somebody got it all the way over here. How? I don't know. I'm a sloppy
drinking
boy.
problem.
Your sloppy boy, Harry, got burn mouth. All right, so we got together today because Michael has some new progress.
Oh yeah,
lay it on us, big guy.
So, well, I've got two things today. One is actual. The second thing is actual prep. For the first time in my appearance on Prep School, I have actual prep to do. The first thing, though, is last time I was on, I was showing and briefly talking about a new setting I'm working on. And I have made a lot of progress on that.
Nice.
In multiple directions. More fleshed out world, but the main thing that I brought for today to show off was the map that I've been working on.
Oh, share your screen. Share away.
Let me present. Share screen. I need to. Yep, I know. Thank you for the two monitors. This one here. I'm currently in the map editor.
Are you using Incarnate?
I am. I use Incarnate for my world maps.
I do too.
It's good for world and regional stuff. I don't really like it for battle maps. I use Arkenforge for that, but
I think Shannon uses Arkenforge for a lot of stuff.
Arkenforge is great as a virtual tabletop.
They speak highly of it.
It's definitely like if you're going to get into it, which it's not a subscription service, so once you buy it, you own it, which is nice.
That is nice.
Nice.
Increasingly
There
rare.
are it comes with a few hundred free assets, and it was like $30 when I bought it for the base program, and then there are tons of content packs that you can buy that are like $5, $10, $15 depending on what it is. And it's a great virtual tabletop. It's not the most like advanced flashy looking tabletop out there, and it's made by a very small team of people, so it's being worked on constantly and improved constantly. But it's a really good virtual tabletop. I have a flat screen monitor that I use for in-person games that I hook up to my laptop.
Oh, nice.
And we lay that down on the table and everybody can see what's going on. And then I make all my tokens. I have a subscription to Hero Forge, so I make all the tokens that I can there. You can't really make monsters, which is a bummer, but you can make really good player character tokens and NPC tokens and stuff.
Makes sense.
Yeah, so I got this map here. So I don't have a name for this world yet. I don't have a name for these two continents you see.
Well, blow it up a little bit if you can.
I'm
blind. I'm a blind man.
Yeah, let me see if I can find. Let me actually try maybe, because it won't fit the screen is the downside. But here we'll just start up here. We'll just start up here.
That's what I always have to do is like pick an area and then like go in and then move.
Yeah, we'll just do the top half. Oh, and I need to get rid of this notification too. Hang on, there we go. Yeah, so I don't have a name for this world yet. I don't have a name for the continents. I'm very picky about that stuff. I don't like to just go like, oh, here's a name. It's got to sound right. You know, when I say it out loud, it's got to have a good mouth feel to it. You know, I'm pretty picky about naming, and I will change names of things frequently until.
Well, I mean, don't you feel though too? Like it depends on the culture. You could have
absolutely
have multiple names and still be the same place just based upon
right. I mean, like you can kind of see, like I've got places here. I've got like, very much in that kind of same vein. Like if I zoom in here, I've got like these two countries up here, Tovania and Vagrovnia. You know, they're like Kiev and Rus. Sort of inspired, so even though I didn't necessarily look up like real words, I looked up sounds and like the names of real world cities and stuff like that to come up with those names. So you can see the capital. Like right now, all I've got is the only cities I have are capitals that have names, because it's kind of one of those things. It being both a fantasy setting for tabletop, but also I want to use it for books and stuff.
You're actually putting down kind of this is my setting. This is what I want to build a fiction off of.
Yeah, and then we got going over here. We have Tannenland, so this is think like it's very Germanic. And in this setting, I've decided that that gunpowder is like just becoming prevalent, and so Tannenland is going to be like a big pre-industrial nation where they're going to be kind of the masters of black powder. And here's this country down here, Matrina. They're like a Balkan state. They just get stomped on by all of their much bigger neighbors. So they don't have. I'm sure
it's because they've got an interesting kind of potential trading hub via a body of water.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure it's kind of like what is that, the Alsace-Lorraine and between France and Germany that keeps trading hands and things like that, where it's like, oh, this is just an area that's constantly in flux because of the larger powers around it.
Yep. Or like different parts of the Baltic Sea.
Yeah.
Actually, right, kind of where I'm thinking right now is they've been kind of in the midst of a 100 years war.
Whoa, hold on a second.
Is
that a puppy on stream?
They're a dog. I didn't even see the dog.
Doggy. Okay, sorry. I always get excited when we see one.
No, that's okay.
This is Puck.
Aww.
Look. Let's see here. Yeah, so
quiet boy too.
Yeah,
I like a quiet dog. We have a dog barking problem in my neighborhood. There's like 6 houses in a row. They all have dogs that bark. So when one of them starts barking, they all start barking, and I get heated. Because it was just like one neighbor that had a barking dog, that's fine. But when you've got like
Yeah,
6
you get
people
the
who all
chain
have barking dogs and they all just start barking at each other multiple times throughout the day, and
He's
I'm
just
trying to
talking.
I know, but it's like I got my ADHD and I can't fucking deal with that type of background noise. I can't shut it out. I can't ignore it. So I don't get mad at the dogs. It's not the dog's fault.
No, it's bad
Oh.
owners.
It's the
There's
owner.
very few bad dogs.
That's
It's
the
bad
distinction.
owners.
If you ever hear me complaining about animals, it's not me complaining about the animals, it's complaining about the owners. Yeah, so you have this country Matrina. They've kind of been getting stomped on for a while. They're currently involved in a very long-standing war with the country across the sea here, the Howling Sea, Galicia, which I'm thinking is sort of like a New Mexico. That's a good one. And let's see. I don't want to just get super bogged down in explaining every single detail.
No. I think just hit the high points. I like your archipelago island thing in the bottom.
Oh yeah, that's very very much like I was like. I'm trying to think of Greece, the Aegean Sea, all those little islands. And
is there a reason like that
there is. I guess I haven't completely settled on what the reason for it is yet, though. I kind of way I sort of make maps is I don't go into it going like, oh, I'm going to have this area that it was made by this thing. Like I just sort of start like this whole map started off as like a very long C, like the letter C, and then I just started adding to it and like taking stuff away and filling things out, and then I've got certain geographical things that you see on a map and you go, oh, that's cool. Like I'm a big fan of a land bridge, as you can see up here, and I love long narrow islands and sea lanes. I think that's a very cool dynamic. I've got a nasty swamp up here, as you can see. And then as I go and put in geographical features, I start kind of thinking about what could be cool to do in this spot, and that's how I wound up with the red scar, this big old nasty thing in the middle here. I don't know exactly. That's another thing that I still haven't figured out exactly what caused it, but this is a setting where the people who live in it don't really have answers to a lot of these things either. So
that's what ancient ruins are for. That's what old books.
Well, exactly, and it's like this world is meant to be very much inspired by how we look at history through the lens of we have all of these different accounts. How do we piece together something resembling the truth, like an accurate truth, from these different perspectives and different cultures? These people over here don't have a written record of it, but they do have an oral tradition. But these people over here do have written records, even though they're contradictory and
here's a cache of books that say something completely different than what the overall consensus is.
Or there's a religion, or the religious folks have their own interpretation of that story, and I can see Tannenland. If one is, I would Tovania or Vergrovnia are more closer to the Russian analog here.
See, whenever I just see the red scar, all I think of is the green scar.
The red scar
is all I can think of is Planet Hulk.
Oh God,
Planet Hulk, Planet Hulk, not World War Hulk.
I've got these 3 countries here: Varay, Galicia, Carolus. They're kind of like a they used to be a unified kingdom, kind of like the Carolingian Empire under Charlemagne in early Middle Ages France and Germany. And when he died, the way succession worked in those days is they did that was before primogeniture, before your eldest male heir. So when you died, your kingdom was divided up amongst your sons and your children, and so that's kind of what happened here. It's now we have these 3 distinct kingdoms. One of them, Galicia, is going to be sort of Anglo-Saxon. Varay is Norman French, and Carolus is kind of Irish, Scottish Highlanders sort of vibes. We've got Bierskol, which is our kind of Denmark, Scandinavia. This is where the Vikings come from. And I've got my sort of desert, Saharan grassland nations down here. Hijram, Kuz, Benim, Maruk, and Kajal. We've got a big old desert. I always got to have a big desert. And then I've got some jungle stuff. And last time I was on, I didn't have names for like any of this stuff. So I've and a lot of that I was looking up like Peloponnesian languages and like Maori and stuff like that. And again, it's not like an exact one-to-one.
No, I don't think it needs to
interpretation of the language, but it's sort of like, oh, these are cool. It's like it's the same way that I approach naming naming these places in the northern half of this map. It's like like taking the sounds of those languages and kind of going, what are the ones that like fit together the coolest, and like if I can like borrow parts of these words of like the meaning, because the I start when I was naming these things, I start with like what do I want it to be like in English.
Mm-hmm.
And then I look up like, well, what if and like the way I look up is like I just do a Google Translate, because this is fantasy and we don't have to be like 100% correct about all these things.
Dialects.
And then go, okay, well, this is there's a lot of cool, because one of the unfortunate things, one of the reasons I don't think it's a good idea, or why it's hard to use 100% accurate translations of real languages, is that oftentimes the thing that sounds cool in like, for me being an English speaker in English, it doesn't sound as cool in the other language. And it's like, well, the reason I picked that language is because I thought it would sound cool in that one, and it doesn't. So I gotta like do something here. Like it's sort of one of my main, honestly, it's one of my only real gripes with like Matt Mercer is I don't really like the way he does a lot of his naming conventions. They're too complicated and too silly a lot of the time, and they're not supposed to be silly, but they come off being silly, I think. I don't know. I don't like trying to talk about the lore of this world is tough because I'm still figuring it out, and what I do have figured out is a lot. But it's sort of like, think like, if have this eternal empire over here. They're very much inspired by like old Byzantium, the Eastern Roman Empire, more so than the Western Roman Empire, because I feel like the Western Roman Empire is a bit overdone as far as like inspiration for ancient civilization or what have you, and so it's more interesting to me to, rather than leaning into like Latin or Roman, lean into Greek and like Anatolian. Yes, it is a volcano. It's called Ignagor's Fist. Ignagor is the god of fire in this world. I've been coming up with my own gods and things too.
Have you ever looked at, Mike? There are a few tools for world building, but I believe it was 2nd edition. Let me look really quick. I've got the books on my thing. I've got a file in DMing called World Building. There was an old book, and I think I still have the actual book. Maybe it's not in this folder. I'm
just showing around so people can see.
No, go right ahead, please.
Things here. See some of the cool. I'm trying to think of like the best concepts I have for like big world stuff. Oh, this is what I really like. It's the city of mazes here. This is like my little sort of nod to cosmic horror, or one of my nods to cosmic horror.
Isn't that a title of a city in Fritz Lieber's stuff, though?
I'm not familiar.
Oh, dude, you got to read the Fafford and Gray Mouser stuff.
But this is essentially, it's like a city that is clearly not volcanoes. Well, I mean, think about the real world. There's volcanoes all over the place, like.
I didn't even notice Matt's got his one of his kitties out.
Cat, the orange cat. Yeah, I've got Ignagor's Fist there, and then down here is called the Burning Cradle. And this was kind of an idea where I was like, I've got these volcanoes here, and volcanic soil is extremely fertile because of all the nutrients, all the minerals and stuff in it. So I was like, well, what if you had like this volcanic plain where the volcanoes are like in a constant state of sort of low key eruption rather than like exploding, but they're constantly oozing and bubbling lava. And so that would create an upper kind of crust of lava with flowing lava underneath it. And so it's just like on the surface, some in sparse little pockets. I'm thinking of like if you've ever seen any paleo art of like late Cretaceous North America, when there were just volcanoes and shit all over the place, and like it was obviously, it was obviously like you can see plants and trees and stuff, but it's kind of scattered and sparse and it's not like a super dense forest. That's kind of what I'm going for here. And like thinking about it from a gameplay mechanic, it's like, well, if you're traveling through this area, one of the natural hazards is like, oh, your foot went through some of the brittle, thin, dried, solidified magma on the surface, and now there's flowing magma underneath, and maybe you lose a foot or something, And like I don't really think too much about like game mechanics when it comes to like designing this stuff. It's more important to me. It's honestly one of my big gripes with video games as like a 30-something, is that so much stuff in video games feels so contrived as a way to get a game mechanic to work. And it's like, there's got to be better ways of designing this stuff.
I think unfortunately though, that's the way that, and I'm not a game designer at all, but I think especially with video games, because they're driven by mechanic.
Oh, absolutely.
They have to be in lockstep to work.
Right. I just think that it's less about like finding a way to get the mechanics to work in like the context of the setting, and more about how you do that, how you present that. And I think some games do it much better than others, where like they kind of hide the game mechanic behind some cool lore. Like, it's one of the things that I really like about the Soulsborne series is that they have checkpoints, but the checkpoints are not just checkpoints. They have some significance to the story, and like there's some clues to be gleaned from their presence, and like that sort of stuff. I think that stuff is great. And I just, with a lot of Western game development these days, it feels like that stuff is very, very secondary to everything else.
Well, you gotta play to your primary audience though too, and I don't think a lot of audiences want that.
No, it very much depends on the game. But that's why I like the Soulsborne games, is because they do that stuff.
So here's the book. I'm gonna steal the screen really quick.
Go for it.
Here's the book I was talking about. Like I said, I'm pretty sure I still have a copy of this, like an actual physical copy.
Mm-hmm.
But this is a great book. It's Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. It's the World Builder's Guide.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, the cover's amazing.
I love that guy on the right. Huh?
And then the little goblin guy just going, I don't know about this.
Yes, you've got something interesting to say here.
But it's mainly in that old school D&D style. It's like, hey, this is just a shit ton of randomizers.
Nice.
And it's everything from like from continents to world hooks to your actual solar system.
Nice.
It's a very, very, very interesting game. It talks about like the things that might be important to your world, like race domination, class domination, black powder, how warfare is actually handled. It's got your worlds and planetology. It's just a really interesting book. Like, it also talks a lot about like seismology and tectonics. This is a book that I always tell people, if you're in the midst of world building or you're in the start of world building, like, this is super cool. Hey, let's do some percentiles on how often volcanoes and earthquakes take place.
Sure.
It adds a lot, I think, to that. Like, first of all, a Viking longboat on skis going downhill. This is amazing. So So I think that, I would always tell people if they're looking for a good book that helps put some perspective and some interesting tools in your hands,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, just let me know, because this is a digital copy I've got floating around, um, with a bunch of other interesting, like creative campaigning, design kits, city builders, things like that, dungeon builders. The weird thing about like advanced and second edition is they put out a lot of interesting source books that was just like, here, make your own shit. Where it was like, we're encouraging you to homebrew.
Mm-hmm.
There's all these books, and you can use them however you want. But we just wanted to, because homebrewing is the backbone of our future business model, and then that kind of
Mm-hmm.
went away, and then but it was too late because everybody homebrews.
Yeah. Well, it's like a game, like tabletop games, I think, are just sort of.
Well, you want to tell your own
Homebrew's
story.
happen, yeah, homebrew's going to happen because you like not every there is no system that does everything.
Well, also, like, I mean, I'll just talk about Domains of Dread. The domain that you guys played in for that most of that series was a homebrew domain, but it was the only homebrew domain. You guys just happened to choose it for whatever reason. I still don't know.
I don't remember.
In a world that's a bunch of cool domains.
Mm-hmm.
So which gives me license to go bug nuts crazy with it. But there was a couple other domains where I was like, oh, I wish they would have chosen this. Like I love I can't think of the name off the top of my head, the one that's basically Frankenstein. I love that. And I used it for a Extra Life a couple years ago.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a lot of cool ones. We talked about it on Thursday on Spoopy Boys. There's one that's controlled by a wolf weir bard who heads a bunch of bard colleges and then has a bunch of werewolves under thrall.
Cool.
So it's kind of this constant kind of debauchery thing. And he, because he can't make other wolf weirs, but he can make werewolves. But if they've ever found out he was a wolf weir, they would kill him. But he controls the domain. And he's constantly like picking people out to join these various packs. So there's like kind of this political intrigue. There's kind of the classic, flip trope of a werewolf. There's a werewolf in the village. Instead, there's a villager in the werewolves. So there's all kinds of cool things you can do with that.
Mm-hmm.
Even with the changes they made, which I think Falknovia is the one they changed, where it's like a country that's now under, a never-ending zombie apocalypse.
Oh boy!
Which is when you're talking about it from the from the viewpoint of like a D&D world, it's kind of fucking scary.
Yeah.
And the fact that they're infectious zombies, which is another thing that's different than most zombies in D&D. They're like, it's just hordes of zombies constantly, and just a slow ebb and flow of civilization will push back for a little while, but inevitably will fall to the horde.
That's cool. Yeah, I haven't gotten to the point where I'm doing a ton of like specific world building. I'm still working in big, like broad strokes for the time being, just because it being one, this, even though the map looks really good and I'm very happy
it's
with
very, very nice looking map.
Where like I'm very happy with where it is so far. Again, because I want to use this setting to write like books and stuff in, I've got to work on this is not going to be a setting it's not going to work for 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. It's too low magic, and we don't have like any fantasy species. It's like all humans, and then anything that like is resembling a fantasy species is like Neanderthals to Homo sapiens. It'll be like a different kind of human subgroup. Sort of not subgroup, but another species. So if I have hobbits, they'll be like, or halflings, it'll be like, oh, they're pygmies. Or like if I have a Goliath or something, it'll be like, oh, these are like a people that at one point were either experimented on or bred with giants, and so now we have these like sort of extra big, extra tall human guys, and we'll have like people that have some sort of elven kind of qualities, like they can see in the dark much more easily than other people, and that sort of a thing.
I like the idea too that a lot of those races have, maybe this is like the fifth age or whatever, and they are just leaving. They're returning to ancestral homes, or they're dying out.
Yeah, it's not really that kind of it's not really like a Tolkien setting.
Well, I'm not even saying that. Like, the dwarves maybe just decide the surface world is not for us, so fuck off. And they've got their own things going on underground, their own history, everything else.
Mhm.
I like the idea always of like the more high fantasy races either having died out or having retreated so far because of population attrition that once you run into them, it's like running across a tribe. Like in modern day, when we occasionally run across a tribe of people who have not seen like modern technology, and you're just like, holy shit, you've been living this way so effectively and so well hidden for so long. It's
in this setting, it's definitely more the former. Like if there were any of these fantasy species, they're gone now, and so what's left are people who carry on small bits of their genetics. Is more how I'm thinking, because again, I like high fantasy and I like the 5th edition sort of approach to fantasy, but for my own stuff, it's too. I like my medieval fantasy, as I've said, and
not quite dark fantasy, but more gritty.
Not like dark, not like The Witcher, where it's like everything is horrible to everybody all the time, and we're living in basically like this bleak, dark age. Not like that. I mean, that being said, I do like me some grimdark. I'm a big 40K fan, but I like to have a little seasoning, a little grimdark seasoning. I don't like the whole meal being grimdark is like just too much.
I'll take a side of grimdark.
Just like a small side of grimdark with like a little bit less.
So you talked about not wanting to use 5th edition. Might I make a suggestion?
Yeah, well, I'm looking at low magic fantasy settings that I could run
Cairn
extended campaigns in, not like mission. Like a lot of them are like, what I've been seeing is a lot of the low magic games are for like Western Marches style games. Basically,
I would recommend either Shadow Dark, which finished up on Kickstarter probably 2-3 months ago, made well over $1 million. I actually, last session of Chaos Scar, I used one of the rules from Shadow Dark, which was when a group lights a torch, you start a timer on your phone. They have those torches last 1 hour real time.
Oh, cool!
And then they go out, and which put the onus on the players. Were like everything they found on the wall that was ignitable, they were igniting because they were like, I do not want to be down here in the dark.
That's cool.
Shadow Dark is really, 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 really cool. I did the Kickstarter. I think Beard did the Kickstarter too. Lots of interesting concepts. It's like a very much like, hey, you like 5th edition D&D? Good. Let's streamline it to make it faster, easier, but just as interesting with some small like tangent elements that make it discernibly different. The other one that I'm become a huge fan of and highly recommend is a game called Cairn. And Cairn is another like, hey, we're going to take D&D and we're going to strip it way down to its basest elements. I think it's a 3-stat game. The other thing it does is everyone can cast spells.
Oh, see, magic is a thing that I got to be really careful about in this setting because it's not common. It's very rare.
But in order to cast a spell, you need to have a book, and that book casts one spell. And it's got a very much a backpack style inventory system, so you have to be able to fit it in your backpack.
Sure.
So, and a book takes up a lot of space in a backpack. So you if you're going to have a couple books, you're not going to be able to carry anything else.
Yeah.
And it's a one-time use spell. So it's like a scroll, but it's a book. And also, when you're casting it, requires both hands. So you can't do anything else when you're doing that.
Yeah, I'm still figuring all this stuff out.
Most of the spells are not like Fireball. Most of them are utility-esque spells. So it is definitely like, oh shit, I have to really think about like what I want to do with this. And I think it makes Magic far more interesting in a way where it's not just like Magic's hard to find. It's more like Magic is hard to use.
Yeah, and that's very like one of the things that I want to incorporate too, and this is mostly for the sake for like the book writing, and so if trying to find something for tabletop is going to be, I think, kind of challenging. Is I think Magic, and especially in a low Magic setting, should have a pretty steep price. Not just like you can only cast a spell once, but it's like no, you've like the whole A Song of Ice and Fire, blood for blood, a life for a life thing, where it's like if you want to try and resurrect somebody from the dead, you have to kill someone. It's a trade-off, like
I think that's one thing that Mercer does really well with large scale.
He does a really good job with ritual casting,
yeah,
and
ritual
like
casting.
Yep, and like having people have to participate in a ritual in order for resurrections to work. I think that's a great.
I would also. Have you ever heard of a game of Beyond the Wall?
Actually, that's one of the ones I was looking at.
I played and Beard played in a long, like actual play podcast of Beyond the Wall where Zach ran it, and Beyond the Wall is great. It's really great because like you set up like multiple antagonists running simultaneously, and every time you're not addressing one of them, they're moving forward on their track. So there's always something going on. You have to figure out how to address it. It's also got that low magic feel because you're young, you're in an isolated area. The players help make the map at the beginning of the game by a thing where it's like you get to pick one thing you know is true, one thing you think is true, and one thing you know isn't true, and that can contradict other players.
Sure.
It's great. It's again another book that I actually own physical copies of because we were playing it so much, and it can take on different tones, so which is great.
Yeah, it's definitely one that I've been looking at because I brought it up in our D&DDT group chat, and somebody suggested I look at it. I have been perusing, but it is. I do not have the money to buy it, so I haven't been able to look at it.
Well, you can check your beautiful messenger. Nice.
Yeah, and like I said, it's going one of those things where like it'll probably take me a while to find something that fits because like I always miss the people who are sitting Mitch here with the magic spells, having it be like that direct. That's like a little too direct for a price, like it's again. If people are only familiar with the world of Ice and Fire through a Game of Thrones, the show, you're not going to have a very good sense of like the vibes that I want to get for the magic, because I think, frankly, Game of Thrones did a pretty bad job with most of the fantasy elements of that world. It did a really good job with the interpersonal dynamics, but the fantasy components got completely left on the wayside in the show, in my opinion. And magic is mysterious. It is imprecise. The way it's described as a book is you are wielding a sword with no hilt. And so having things that are like, in order to cast a spell, you have to cut off your finger. One, it's a little further than I want to go as a general thing. Perhaps there are like, I could see maybe there being like a religion or something that does something like that. But also it's not sustainable. Like you will only have so many fingers, like, and the powerful, and like the thing is there are going to be people who are powerful, like spellcasters in the setting, but they will be mostly within institutions. It'll be like one of the things that I really am going to merge in this setting are astronomy and astrology, because this is a fantasy setting. So it's like but I also do really like real world concepts, things in physics and things in botany and things like that. I think a lot of that, having those things in your world adds some depth to it. Like I'm going to be using galvanism, basically Frankenstein using electricity to generate.
Could you potentially, though, say that like the more active casters you have in an area is what makes magic work better.
Possibly.
Because they're like all pouring energy into a pool that then it's easy to draw more out of.
Yeah, that could work. I have that's one of those puzzle pieces that I haven't quite gotten figured out yet. But like, you know, on the subject of like people sacrificing their body parts and stuff for magic, there's a school of astrologers. And I got this is a real world thing. There's a woman who I always forget her name, but she's a Puerto Rican woman. She's a Puerto Rican astrophysicist, and at some point early in her career, she suffered a disease that made her go blind, and so she couldn't look through telescopes anymore to study the stars. Her passion. So what she did is, rather than changing fields, she figured out a way to use sonification, which is the process of using sound as a way of measuring things. Like a Geiger counter for radiation is using sonification. She
Kind of like the boy. Have you ever watched the documentary "The Boy Who Sees Through Sound"?
No, but she started using sonification to track the movement of stars, and as a result, she made several discoveries that no one would have ever made if they hadn't done what she did and listened to the stars rather than look at them. So the way that is going to kind of play into the setting is that I think there will be two factions, two schools. I haven't quite gotten the particulars down, but there will be two groups of astrologers. One are fairly normal academic wizardy kind of types, and some of them are blind, whether it's through old age or they were born blind or whatever. And so they've created this device that will allow them to use sonification to continue to practice as astrologers. But there's also a more fanatical side to that, where there is a branch of them that the way their little group works is that in order to ascend and become like a master in their field, you have to put your own eyes out. And so they have like their apprentices are sighted, and so they do all of the little busy work, and all the masters are like plugged into this sonification machine, just like listening to the stars constantly.
That's very Lovecraftian.
Yeah, well, Lovecraftian stuff is big for me, and like and
that's got a very much a like
not in the way like everything's got a tentacle face. Like it's the vibes of Lovecraft that I really want to capture. Like the weird.
While you were talking about your City of Mazes, all I could think of was Dread Carcosa.
Well, dude, it's very much like it's. I'm riffing on the whole like color out of space thing as well, where like a meteor crashed and some weird shit started happening. Yeah. You know, the black rot fens up in the northeast there. My sort of in-head canon for that is like in Black Lake, there's a big old fucking space meteor at the bottom of the lake that's been polluting and changing and altering that land, you know, for who knows how long. And because it's like this big swampy area, that corruption has been getting carried downstream, you know, so it's spreading in that direction. And like, I have one thing up here. I don't have any information about this yet, other than what it's called, but Angel's Fall. This is another sort of meteor impact site where I'm thinking like, you know, you can see I've got the two different colored spots of ground there. So something happened there. And down here, City of Mazes, this is very, as you said, very like Lovecraftian, Carcosa, whatever.
I always like the idea of a place like that where you do get like, you know, I think Pathfinder does a better job of this, I think maybe than D&D does, of the fact that like the people of Ling show up in Pathfinder, the traders of Ling, and you can accidentally find yourself on the plateau, the last plateau of Ling, which leads you to exactly having a view of, you know, Dread Carcosa. You can go there. You don't want to, but it's there.
So the City of Mazes is one of my first really early concepts, and it was like, so what I'm envisioning is it's like a coastal city, ancient, so ancient that nobody even really knows anymore who built it. I'm thinking aliens, most likely, because I do want to have like some weird star people, you know, where like they bred with humans, and so they're very much like Shadow over Innsmouth. You know, they got like really far apart eyes and wide mouths and stuff.
What if that's where some of your races just left?
Well, that's yeah, like, you know, because I love. I've recently become enamored with the idea of like aliens in fantasy. Like not in everything, but like if you do it the right way, it can be really cool. But the City of Mazes is made of like the oily black stone kind of thing,
Non-Euclidean geometry.
like the thing is, it's actually very Euclidean because it's mazes, but it's flat. It's like if you go up to the very top of it, it's a completely flat plane, like it's this uniform.
So something that would be impossible to have been built by.
Yeah, and most of the city's abandoned; it's empty. But there are these strange, again, like these Shadow over Innsmouth, these deep folk that live like near the sea, and they only really inhabit like one part of the city. And it's very clear that they are not the people who built this, because they have their own architecture kind of like shoved in between all of the existing.
It's like bad additions.
Well, it's like, yeah, that, but where I was coming at it from, but that is a very good analogy, is like if you go into a really, really old city in the real world, you will see the layers of like, okay, but we've got, especially if you go into an old church, like the Hagia Sophia in Constantinople still has on the roof, it's a mosque, an Islamic mosque. It still has a fresco on the roof of the Virgin Mary and Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like this idea that history comes in layers, you know, and so like rather than like you can't get rid of everything from history, so either you repurpose it or you try and cover it up with something else. You know, you put another statue in front of the old statue, so you get sort of like, well, people can still see it, but this one is more important and in the front and it's bigger, so they'll mostly look at this one and kind of ignore that one.
Mitch, and Mike, I'd point that out. I like this idea that the City of Mazes is an airport. That it literally was like a space station. It was like a spaceport. Yeah,
I don't think
it's Mos Eisley of its time.
Could be, you know. I like the way I've got the alien. I have some ideas for how the aliens are here, because I think like maybe they're not, but like they're sort of part human descendants are still around.
Maybe they died out. Maybe there was, you know, one thing I like about
they're fleeing something. They came to this planet from their planet, which has been consumed by a star god.
Well, one of the things I like about certain parts of Lovecraftian mythos is that our world was not our world. Like it was a battle. It was a place where like the old ones and, you know, different races were fighting for control when humanity was just.
Let me pull up.
Also, I would highly recommend using something like oh gosh darn it, what the hell am I trying to say? What the fuck is the Expedition to the Barrier Peaks? As a good example of like some of these dungeons are just spaceships. Mm-hmm. They're just vessels that have crashed. Like that's my favorite adventure of all time.
Yeah, I definitely think there's going to be something like that. Like there's big old fucking thing is actually a crashed ship, you know, like but like in a weird fantasy kind of way. Because they fled their original homeworld, which is in this same star system. I'm kind of like creating a sort of snow globe universe where like there's the whole cosmos out there, but really all that matters is like this planet and the couple of other planets like nearby.
So one thing also I really like that I would be remiss if I didn't mention is there is a D&D third party thing called Red Sky, and it's very alien centric, and the whole thing is you find out that you're still on a spaceship.
Cool.
Like I think like
where is it?
Orville did an episode like this where they go somewhere. They find a giant spaceship and they get on the spaceship and they realize that like it's just like was a transport system for a race that fled their planet, and they've gone backwards in technology and they can't figure out how to operate the ship, and now to the point where they can't even get into the ship proper. So Orville season 1. Thank you, Mitch. It's a really interesting like concept. I like the idea. It's like they built these habitats to to simulate like what was. And now like this has become their world. So when outsiders like enter it, it's like, you know, it's a religious event instead of a scientific thing, and they have to basically be shown like, hey, you're travelers like us, you just lost your way.
Yeah, I've got so many story concepts that at this point I'm just throwing things on the pile.
No, totally. And that's what you should do. I mean,
yeah, because like I've got, let's see, these are the major concepts that I have working with the world. I'm not going to go into them specifically, and then I will also stop, and one of our other friends can fucking get a word in edgewise here because I've been talking the whole time. Let's see, cosmic beings as gods, so there aren't creator gods. It is very much like Lovecraftian. Again, I because Lovecraft himself is a fairly problematic individual, I've kind of shifted more towards thinking about it as like cosmic horror as opposed to like specifically Lovecraftian horror. And because he's at this point by far not the only person. He's definitely not the only person who's like tapped into that. So I've got like my cosmic beings as gods. Which basically are like these ever hungering entities that are, you know, they crave kinetic and potential energy. And so, like if any of the viewers are familiar with the Catan from Warhammer 40K, they're kind of more like that type of star god entity thing. And I've got, let's see, the cosmic beings as gods, the order of time, what I currently am calling the chronal operandi. It's like this thing that the god of time implemented as a way to try and like be in control of everything. It didn't work as well as they wanted it to. So but it is like kind of like, it's a bit like what the music in Silmarillion, how it's sort of strongly implied that Iluvatar and all of his like Maiar children, the song that they sing when they come into being, it's sort of strongly implied to be like the song is the song of the world, and so the world will follow the order that the song they sing. And you know, Melkor, his discordance is, you know, comes to pass kind of a thing. It's very much like in that sort of vein, but more nefarious.
One thing too, I was thinking about it earlier, and I forgot to bring it up. If you're looking for like alternative histories and things like that, I would recommend, if you are into it, is I would get a couple different groups to get people together, and I would do Microscope with the understanding of like you're the end editor, it's your world. But if you've done Microscope before, it's just a history building creative exercise with a group of people. Where people are like, hey, this event took place, and then people can build off that event. And Beard probably runs it a little bit better than I do. But it's a very interesting, fun concept, especially if you set parameters at the beginning of like, hey, I'm not looking for goofy shit, so don't do it. And if that's not your thing, then this probably isn't your group to do this in, but I'm looking for like, this is the vibe I'm looking for. And then you can just take from that and you can get rumors and lies and actual history from it. And what I would recommend doing is taking it from very broad perspectives, and then taking that information and then making it detail oriented to your setting. The other thing I would recommend doing, and if you haven't listened to this before, I can't recommend it enough, is when the McElroys did the Taz season called Ethersea, I believe the game they played at the beginning was the Long Year.
Drawfee has a couple episodes on their streaming channel where they play that. Yeah, I've watched those.
Yeah, so let me look it up real quick.
And actually, I'm gonna dip. I got my lunch thing to go to. This has been really interesting.
Thank you, Matt.
Your stuff is super cool, Mike.
Great, thank you so much.
Good to see you guys. Thanks for joining us. And
yes, thank you guys very much.
Yeah, thanks.
The Quiet Year. It's called The Quiet Year. Bye, Matthew. Bye, Brian. So The Quiet Year was they got together and they it's very similar. I think it might be by the same person who made Microscope and Kingdom. But it's a creative like group project, and they create the situation of like what led up to, in that particular case, what led up to the apocalypse that led all the races to have to go under the sea. Like, and some of it gets very specific. Like, hey, here's an event my future character was involved in.
Cool. That's interesting.
Then gets as big as like there was a war going on over there.
Yeah, I want to mess around with that at some point, you know. And like I said, for me with this setting, I'm working at it from the standpoint of both wanting to use it for tabletop games, but also as a book. So I'm being very careful about concepts and stuff and like crowdsourcing.
Well, what I would always say about that is make sure everybody agrees from the very beginning, because I don't think there's anything better than crowdsourcing with friends to understand like that this is yours. They're just sharing in the process.
Yeah, and like it's tough because I find that I'm the sort of creative that while I don't have like a clear vision of what it will look like in the end, I know what I want it to feel like and have a hard time putting that into words.
That's why
You know?
you source big ideas that then inspire you to distill down into your actual full vision.
Yeah.
You want, I think like that's one of the best things about what has been one of the best things about prep school is at no point do I ever feel like the game isn't mine. I look at it more of like being in a writer's room where everybody who's involved is definitely like a contributor, but in the end, I have to decide what stays, what goes, because I have to be able to use it. It has to be usable for me.
Right.
So I think that always helps. And I also find that when people, and again, hey, chat, correct me if I'm wrong on this in any way, shape, or form. I also find that people are excited to help with creative processes. They're excited to add their voice to stories. And in the end, a lot of times I find that especially things like the chat that we do on these mornings is they are better at taking an idea I have and extrapolating it into like 3 or 4 different directions that I would have never thought of. And usually 1 or 2 of them end up being things that are more intriguing to me to follow through. Now I may not want to follow through them to their natural endpoint, but I could follow them through and then they take me down an alternative path where I was like, why didn't I think of this? This is so much better than the rote tropey thing that I was spinning my wheels.
Yeah, I've been really trying to like get deep into some of the things that inspire me so I can have a better understanding of like what inspired them to create it that way. Because like the thing with fantasy, I think fantasy is one of the genres, feels like fantasy and like mystery are like 2 genres that have such a hard time breaking away from the tropes of their genre. And with mystery, it's tougher, I think, because the formula of mystery is a big part of why people like that genre. My mom is really big into mystery stuff. And even though it's like, she'll say like it's basically the same order of events, the fun part is trying to put the pieces together yourself.
The journey, not the destination.
And I think with fantasy, it's like that version of that is Tolkien clones,
I think you can break fantasy into smaller genres.
Oh, you definitely can. I just like the tropes of fantasy are all very Tolkien-esque, though, And
I think there's a lot of tropey stuff that Martin does. There's a lot of trophy
absolutely.
Stuff
I'm not saying that
like Warhammer has. And don't get me wrong,
everything is
fucking love Gotrek and Felix novels. I adore them too.
Everything is a trope. It's just about putting your own spin on it or how you can subvert that trope, Yep. Because the thing that George R. R. Martin does really well that a lot of people don't, if you're not really into his stuff, wouldn't realize, is that he subverts those tropes. Like he puts those tropes in front of you to undermine them in a lot of ways. And not every single thing, but like the whole Targaryens being like having their colors being red and black, that's usually associated with evil. They're not every single member of the Targaryen family, but where they fit into that setting is as kind of ultimately its greatest heroes.
Yeah, I mean,
You know, like
I am not as big, and I've read Martin's work. I'm not as big on it as a lot of people are.
it's not for everybody.
Because I do feel like it's, and I love Stephen King, but sometimes Stephen King, I feel like it gets lost in the weeds. I think Martin's even more guilty of that than King is. So
explain.
Martin will spend a paragraph, 4 pages telling you about the food that was eaten.
Right. And
I'm fine with that. But when you do it for every meal,
mhm.
same thing with King. I love King.
See, I don't like
but
Stephen
not,
King really.
But not every small town has a ton of hidden secrets.
Mhm.
Sometimes things are just on the surface. That's why, like, Salem's Lot and The Stand are 2 of my all-time favorite books.
See, I don't like Stephen King because his stuff was always taking place in the real world. And
not always. The Gunslinger trilogy definitely does not.
I got started with the Gunslinger trilogy. I liked the first book, and then the second book was in New York City. So I was like, I don't care.
Stick with it because it goes.
Dude, I couldn't. I tried. I really tried. I didn't like the new characters.
Have you read Eyes of the Dragon, which was a fantasy novel he wrote?
No, I have not.
It's excellent. He's just did another one too. And the thing that's interesting is, you know, Randall Flagg is an antagonist to a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
In Eyes of the Dragon, the wizard is Flagg.
Interesting.
Because, you know, when you read the Dark Tower stuff, you start to figure out that some of these concepts, it's basically a multiverse before there was like a multiverse.
Yeah. No, I'm familiar. I'm very familiar with like the premises of the Dark Tower books.
So I think
the gunslinger knight dude, like that was so cool, and I was so bummed when the second book became about a crazy old lady and a con man in New York, and I was like, I just don't care about this. I want to go back to the cool fantasy world where knights are cowboys. That was awesome.
But you didn't stick with it long enough to get to the sentient monorail.
I couldn't. I gave it the 100 pages treatment and just couldn't do it. The thing is, even if it's like, I don't see urban fantasy, even, you know, like I just don't like. I find stories that take place in the real world not to be that engaging. And
I enjoy me some Jim Butcher.
I like escapism. You know, I've read about New York a bazillion times. I've seen a bazillion movies featuring New York. I don't want to read another fucking word about New York.
I would say with King, you know, with King, there's not as much kind of that because that's his area, you know, but I put he and Martin in similar categories with that. It's just one I find more interesting than the other. And I don't dislike Martin's stuff. It's not really something that it's not an enjoyable read for me. It's a good read, but I don't find myself gravitating.
The reason why I like that, and I agree with you, particularly about the food thing, like I get kind of tired of that too. But the point of it is to evoke your senses, not just reading words. Like the reason why he goes into those descriptions is to tap into your sight, your hearing, your taste.
He's painting a picture. I completely agree with that.
You know, and if you want to do that, he's trying to make the characters feel like they're living a life. Mm-hmm. It's definitely one of those things where it's like not everybody's cup of tea, but it's not just there for no reason. You know,
I don't think
part of his whole writing philosophy is like, I want you to feel these things, you know, and I think what it does too is because his books have so many characters, that level of descriptive detail makes it much easier to differentiate those characters from each other because you're getting more of their own internalized processes, you know, and it's why every single character that gets a POV chapter feels like a completely different character, is because they think about all these things differently. And they react to them differently, you know, like the little when Tyrion is in the various battles he's in, you know, he can smell the piss and the shit and he can taste the blood in his mouth and all that stuff. And like a lot of writers only focus on what you can see, or a lot of storytellers focus only on what you can see. And if you start focusing on other senses as well, it can make those characters feel more alive and more like a person, I think.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, I don't disagree, and I don't disagree with his talent. I just, again, for me, it's not my.
Yeah,
It's something where I like, but don't enjoy.
I love me
And
a slow burn, so
um,
I like those stories because it's like it's a little slow, but the payoff is going to be unparalleled, and when it happens, like just yeah, I love that style of storytelling where like you don't. One, I love that he doesn't do a ton of like pointless expositional dialogue. And the dialogue moves the story forward. It's not just people talking, which again, most good writers do that, but people don't. A lot of people who are not writers don't understand that's the point of dialogue. Dialogue is not filler; it's there to help tell the story. And yeah, I really like his writing style, but I know multiple people who feel the same way about it that you do, and that's totally fine.
yeah, I just think sometimes I think it's with everything. There's going to
Mhm.
be variations on a theme where you're going to like one thing and not like another, and some people are going to be like, "But why?"
That's my thing.
I don't know.
That's my cup of tea.
Yep.
I like musicals. I don't like musicals. Never will. Never can. It just feels the whole. I get that it's part of the medium, but the whole thing just feels super contrived. That we stop to sing about everything, every scene. Like I can't. My own. The way I think about this is like storytelling philosophy stuff now. I don't like when people use the word realistic when they're talking about fictional settings, because it's not realistic, it's fictional. It's all made up. And what you're actually talking about is your own suspension of disbelief. How far can your imagination go and in which directions before it stops being able to support these different things? Like we talked about this last time, like no matter what the in setting justification for it is, even if it's good, my brain just cannot get over I'm a 15-year-old hero and I'm going to save the world. Like I just can't. My brain just goes, no one's gonna let this happen. This is a child. And like I get, and it's not a criticism of it. It's just like my brain just goes, no, I don't think so. And so it just like, whether it's comic books or novels or movies or whatever, I just can't really get into the teenage hero thing, because it's like no adult would let this happen ever, in no world. and again, like internal logic and all that stuff is a big part of it, but that's just my own suspension of disbelief thing, because it's like, no, it's not realistic, but I also love fantasy and sci-fi and stuff like that, so it's like I don't like realistic things either, so it's not really about it being realistic, it's about
It just doesn't fit the tone in the of the belief, the level of disbelief you're willing to cross. That Rubicon.
Yeah, the suspension of disbelief will only carry me so far in that direction, but it will
And
carry me further in other
totally.
directions.
Yeah, no, I think that's a personal taste thing.
Absolutely, no, it
I
totally
think
is.
there's a reason why, like, I harken back to this all the time, is when Beard and those guys were getting ready to play their Veil game, and they were like, "Hey, can we put it in your known world thing?" And I was like, "Sure, fine." And then they immediately had a pre-game discussion about what they didn't want in their game, and a lot of it was shit that was in my setting, and I was like, "Then why use that setting?"
Yeah, use a different setting.
But I having conversations about that, I was like, "Oh, I can see," like, and using it as like a lost continent type of thing.
Mhm.
But being able to say, like, this is the stuff that doesn't fit the stories we want to tell. This is the stuff that it can exist, it just doesn't exist in this part of the world.
Yeah.
That was a really interesting, like, learning and eye-opening thing for where my threshold was coming to the realization my threshold is not your threshold,
Mhm.
and being like, we can still play in the same sandbox together.
Yep, that's the tricky thing with it's tricky but fun. I have a buddy of mine who is very silly. He barely takes anything seriously. I mean, he's a responsible guy, but when it comes to like goofing off, it's always just going to be a joke with him.
Mm-hmm.
And that's great. I love him. But we were me, my brother, a friend of ours, and then my friend and his wife, they're both currently living in Australia. He's my big like Warhammer 40K buddy. We've been playing Warhammer together since we were in like 8th grade. We were sitting down to look at Wrath and Glory, which is a Warhammer 40K D6 dice pool RPG. Because I can't afford the tabletop. I can't afford the tabletop miniatures anymore, and it's changed so much since I last played that I would basically have to start over from scratch. And it's like, well, I've got about $5,000 worth of miniatures that I basically can't use anymore. So
You can.
Well, the thing is, too, they're phasing out. I play Space Marines, so they're phasing out a lot of the firstborn Space Marine models over the next couple of years. So I won't be able to. I'll have to, and which is fine. I don't.
But there's old. You can always play older editions.
Oh, right. I still have all of my old stuff.
To quote Mike Shea about D&D, just because there's a new edition doesn't mean your old edition is gone.
Oh, absolutely. I just like you won't be able to buy a lot of those old miniatures.
That's what third party people are for now.
It's true. With 3D printing opens up a whole bunch of
it's taken the power away from companies like Games Workshop. You know, that's why I'm a big proponent of games like Frostgrave and Stargrave, you know, where, you know, the fourth sentence in the beginning of the book is use whatever miniatures you want.
Yep. See,
it's your game.
I have such a I like having all my stuff like just so I would have a hard time I would have a hard time with 3D printed Warhammer minis if they didn't look exactly the same as the rest of mine did. Because it's like especially playing with like Space Marines where everything is so bold and like there isn't the detail, even the details are fairly uniform. And everything is bright. You know, I play Blood Angels, so all of my guys are fucking red and like straight up like gold, not yellow, gold.
Yeah.
You know, so like you notice when things don't line up, but yeah, that's just sort of referencing that aside. We were looking at this Wrath and Glory thing, and so we were making some characters. And my friend, again, he's always a goofball, and this was kind of designed to be like a, you know, be a little bit silly here, because that's the thing is people who aren't into Warhammer 40K don't see all the silly stuff.
Yeah,
that is actually in that setting. Like orcs, in general, orcs top to bottom are just goofy as hell and hilarious.
Well, it's British humor from that era. It's subversive. It's Judge Dredd.
Yeah, there's a lot of
Judge
that.
Dredd is just it's super, you know, like that. I think it's, you know, having an understanding that the grim dark future where there is only war also has some really fucked up stuff in it. It has some gross shit in it, and it has some really funny stuff in it.
Yeah, some stuff that we look at like culturally and go like, that's a bit goofy.
Orcs are soccer hooligans.
Yeah. I also love all of the fucking space guys, all the space admirals with like laser monocles and stuff. Like, yeah, it's great. The fact that computers are called cogitators and things like that. But he wanted to make, so we were making these characters, and my rest of my group, they made kind of like, it's not quite super serious characters as well, but like, okay, this character kind of fits in as like a soldier here or whatever. And my friend Rob, who's again this very very silly guy, he made a character that is basically a bureaucrat who was mistaken, who has like a similar name to somebody else, and in the uncaring bureaucracy of the Warhammer 40,000 universe, they're like, "That's amazing. It's close enough. Come here." And so he's basically this like Colin Robinson from What We Do in the Shadows kind of character who's just been like thrown into a fucking war zone with like this inquisitorial hit squad, and he's just like, and then the Inquisitor quickly realizes like, this isn't the guy that I asked for, but he is very good at keeping books, so we'll keep him. And it's like, because it's this horrifying draconian awful society that the Imperium of Man is, he's basically in this position where it's like, if he tries to leave, he gets executed, but if he goes back, he gets executed for abandoning his old job, you know. So it's like, what do I do? And it was like, okay, yeah, we can make that work.
But that, I think
not what I expected you to do, but we can figure out how to make that work.
That's kind of though Warhammer 40K in a nutshell.
Yeah, just like the uncanny. It's just like tough shit.
It's a machine. The machine must grind on.
The most within the setting, within the books and stuff. One of the big phrases is the cheapest currency in the Imperium of Man is human life. You can just throw bodies at a problem until the problem goes away, because there are so many people that you can't explaining the setting to people. It's like there are so many people in the Imperium that you can't have a census. It's too big.
Yeah.
By the time that census information comes back, it's going to be 100 years out of date, And so it's just like, yeah, the people fall through the cracks in tsunamis, like it's not a pretty setting to live in. And it's always funny to see people who are like discovering it going like, this is a really toxic. It's like, no, there's a commentary aspect to it here. You're not really supposed to think that anyone is a good guy. Like there's no named character in that setting that's like, oh, that is a hero. That's objectively a good person. That doesn't exist in 40K. It's like everybody is shades of awful. And it just sort of depends on which direction you're pointing that awful.
Even the Tau.
Yeah, because dude, there's a lot of things about the Tau where it's implied that maybe there's this degree of like straight up mind control going on with the Tau.
Well, also they're just kind of like, we'll wait you out. If you say no, we'll just make your life harder until you say yes.
Yeah, well, like, yeah, I mean, and it's like this very uniform. It's basically like people compare it to like the Soviet Union, where it's like there's a collective good, but there's also definitely like a very authoritarian government that is like, because there's a caste system.
Yeah, it's a very much
system. And it's like you can't get out of that caste system.
But then you have to ask yourself, is it better than being biomass? Is it better than being, basically a cog in the empire?
Yeah.
And I do love Mitch. I also love the Kroot. I love the races that like operate in the Tau Empire.
The Kroot are very cool. I'm a big Kroot fan.
That's why I find like, what is it? The folks who go out, rogue traders. I find like rogue traders super interesting. Like I looked at getting into doing like the Fantasy Flight Warhammer RPG stuff, but I was like, why would you want to play a Space Marine? They're all the same.
They're not all the same though. That's the thing.
But I mean, at the base level, even though they have different credos and things like that, I could see like a Death Watch being interesting, where you have the different credos in a group.
That's why there's a whole Death Watch branch of that particular RPG. Yeah.
But just playing like a group of Space Marines, it's a very fatalistic, like to a level of less interesting than Call of Cthulhu fatalistic.
It depends.
Whereas I find like Death Watch is somewhat interesting. Death Watch to me feels very much like what a Slayer would be in Warhammer, where it's like, I'm just looking to find my doom.
Kind of. The Death Watch are recruited from amongst the different Space Marine chapters to serve for a certain period of time in the Inquisition.
But Rogue Trader to me is the most interesting of all of those.
There's a reason why there's like a bunch of games based on Rogue Trader. Yeah.
Yeah, it's just far more like appealing as.
I just want to play as a Space Marine. That's all I want to do. I love.
I can see the appeal. I mean, honestly, it's no different than playing a Paladin.
I love. Here, hang on. 1 second. You keep talking. I'm just gonna roll over here.
I think again, like I said, it's very Paladin. It's like the most stringent of Paladins, which is sometimes interesting. I can't remember what those are called, but
Storm Raven.
Yeah.
This is my Blood Angels Storm Raven. I bought this thing like 5 years ago. I've never used it in a game.
I think that those characters are far more interesting in a skirmish, in a war game, than in an RPG.
That's true. That can be true. I think it depends on like your knowledge base about like what your beliefs are. Because like with Space Marines, it's one of those things where I think Space Marines are tough to play as or to like role play as because they feel like they can only be a certain way. But if you read,
no, their chapters are very different.
Well, even internally, like if you read some of the really good books, those authors do a really good job of making them all still feel like very different people with their own opinions and their own ways of thinking. And like, again, it's tough to do it because yes, there is a certain by design, there is a degree of uniformity amongst the way Space Marines think. They literally have things like fear, like genetically bred out of them, and like, you know, the loyalty is genetically reinforced.
See, that's why to me they feel like less interesting versions of clones in Star Wars.
Yeah, again,
because especially like you watch like the Clone
but...
Wars, and the clones become like individuals.
But
at the same time, though, they pretty much all look the same, and they have some genetic components that are the same.
Mm-hmm.
The difference is, you know, with the clones is they don't know anything else.
Mm-hmm.
That you were born, bred, and aged up to fight in a war. You're not seen as a person.
Space Marines is the same thing. It's
and with the Space Marines, you add the religious component to it, which is to me a little scarier and a little takes some of the individuality away from it.
Yeah, it does. Again, it's very much by design.
And it makes sense in the setting completely.
Mm-hmm.
For me, like in a role playing sense, I think you'd have to be playing. What's the chapter that's like dragonish, where they have like dark skin and stuff like that?
The black. The salamanders.
Yeah, like I was watching a thing where they were talking
about the salamanders.
Like,
they're cool.
Yeah, how they're like actually like extremely virtuous in the fact that they look at the citizenry of the Empire as like the most precious thing to be defended.
You should look up some stuff about the Blood Angels, because the salamanders and the Blood Angels are very similar in that regard. The Blood
I like those tiny intricacies in Warhammer 40K, but I think they get hidden so much that it makes it a far less accessible.
The lore is so deep, like
purposefully.
To your point,
cool.
It's like one of the things that makes it hard for Space Marines to be interesting in like a role-playing setting, I think, is the fact that if you wanted them to feel like different characters and still feel like Space Marines, everyone playing the Space Marine would have to have a really good understanding of how Space Marines are, so that they still all have their own individual personalities and stuff. Because if they're not like, if they don't behave like, each individual guy has his own tempers and his own preferences and his own habits and stuff. But like, you know, they're genetic super soldiers who have been given their genetics from the same genetic source. You know, that's why you have the old days, the legions and
Primarchs.
Nowadays, the Primarchs and the Emperor himself, first and foremost, you know.
Well, I think one of the things about that, I think that does make it so difficult at that point is, I think you need the right type of group to play that type of game, because they have to be like super invested in the setting.
Absolutely.
That's why, like, when I run Star Wars, it's like the accessibility level for a Star Wars game for me is sometimes difficult. I think my wife pointed this out, why she was like, it's not really for me, because my Star Wars interest and breadth and scope is very limited.
Yes.
And you're playing with people who like their Star Wars knowledge is like Beard is, you know, Star Wars is just like something extremely. Hey, Mitch, have a good one. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I hope you're doing well.
Later.
You know,
Star Wars and 40K definitely have that in common, where it's like there's just so much to it that in order to really,
especially if you're the person running, or you're another person playing, and your expectation is like, we're diving into the deep water, like you're going to refer to things that are extremely they're so minute that somebody in the group's going to go, oh, I know what that is. And three other people are going, I have no idea what the fuck you're talking about.
What are you talking about? No, yeah, it's exactly 40K and Star Wars are the exact same way in that regard. Because they're both settings that have like almost transcended the genre that they started in, and they're so big that you can tell any kind of genre story within them.
Yeah.
You know?
Superheroes, same way. If you're playing like a Marvel or DC game, and it's, unless you're playing like the ones we've done at Extra Life, where they're playing like Z grade villains, where they run into like a D grade superhero, and they're, maybe one person in the group's like, I know who that is, and the rest of the group is like, who the fuck is this guy? Like,
Rick Frog,
he's a trucker who wears a giant Razorback helmet.
My favorite D tier villain in Venture Brothers is Brick Frog. Brick Frog.
Yeah. Scare Bear.
What a stupid
I
combo.
throw bricks at people.
He wears a frog suit and throws bricks at people.
I can't remember the guy with the hole in his stomach, like the Fat Chance.
Oh yeah, Fat Chance. Fat Chance.
Fat Chance. I think that those type of things are super interesting when you do have people that are like the way we got away with it last time when we ran that was the players who didn't know were like, hey, I'm just starting out and my criminal career was in like Omaha, Nebraska.
Yep.
This guy's from New York.
That's always
I don't know that.
Way to, like compensate for lack of player knowledge. It'd be like,
yeah.
well, you just knew. You're
new, or this guy that you're running into is also so unknown that only like a fanboy would know about this person. So yeah, that's why they're like, who the fuck are you? And you're like, who the fuck am I? Who the fuck are you?
Yep.
Yeah, I think there's ways to do that, but I think like you said, with 40K, it's harder to do that because the Empire, everybody knows about Space Marines.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's the thing. It's like people know about them, but most people have never seen one.
Exactly.
And probably never will see one.
But that's the thing too. I really love about Star Wars is the Empire's grasp is very, especially when we play in the between episode 3 and 4, is that's the Empire
period.
Yeah, the Empire is like the grasp is large. The actual clutch is not so much, and
it's a big hand, but it's atrophied and weak.
Yeah, it hasn't closed all the way yet. So these, I mean, we're talking pre-rebellion. We're talking about the dissidents. These small groups. Sometimes it's just like, oh, these people were just smugglers, and now that there's a bunch of tariffs and things like that, they're like, well, fuck you, I'm not doing that.
Mm-hmm.
We could get away with it when it was the Republic. We're going to get away with it now. And if you don't agree with that, we'll just shoot at you.
Yep.
And it's like, well, guess what? Now we got bigger ships and bigger guns.
I love the old Republic era personally.
I love the High Republic through the Old Republic. I even like some of that old shit prior to that, like Ulic Quadroma stuff.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like I'm
about
the pre-Disney Star Wars stuff. I just haven't been the stuff Disney's been doing with Star Wars. I don't really have super strong feelings about, but it hasn't been that interesting to me. So
I think they do some things extremely well, and
because the Mandalorian is a fun show. But the thing is, I really like the deep Sith lore, which just doesn't really exist in the
Did you watch Clone Wars or Rebels?
No, I tried watching Clone Wars on I tried to get into Clone Wars on
gotta get to that first season.
Dude, the thing is, I just if I have to get through a whole season though, it's like I could just be doing something else.
The nice thing about the first season is it sets a bunch of groundwork that will get paid off later, but some of the characters are very unlikable. Like you can see where Ahsoka.
It's not a character unlikability thing for me. It's the fact that they haven't figured out how to mesh good storytelling with it being a kids show yet.
There are probably 4 excellent episodes in the first season, but then that quotient just starts to get to the point where the bad episodes are okay, the okay episodes are good, and the good episodes are great.
Yeah, that's what I've heard. Like I've really literally heard nothing but good things about it.
Rebels is where it's at, though.
We're getting into that suspension of disbelief thing again, where because here's the thing. Dave Filoni is a very good creative director. He doesn't write good dialogue, though. Even in The Mandalorian, the dialogue is very boilerplate. This is what I would expect it to be.
I think it's just Star Wars. That's part of the trope. It's why you always get someone saying, "I got a bad feeling about this."
Yeah, but I mean,
familiarity. It's a warm blanket.
We've seen that we don't have to do that though with Star Wars, and Rogue One and in Andor. Star Wars doesn't have to be like that. It can be. But
that's the thing. Star Wars can be a lot of different things.
It's true. It's true.
That's why it's great.
Yeah. No, totally. And it's nothing against things like the Clone Wars or the Rebels, but I do recommend Rebels. You're talking about the Sith lore. Like when they go to that Sith world where Maul basically convinces them that he's just this guy, and but even the new that's a world that exists in the pre-Disney canon, and it's cooler in the pre-Disney canon. Malachor,
it's cooler. But
Malachor is so fucking cool in the.
But here's the thing that makes Malachor cooler in the Disney canon, is because you also get Ahsoka meeting Darth Vader for the first time. and realizing it's Anakin.
Yeah, the
And that's
planet isn't as
heartbreaking.
cool though. The planet
That's
isn't
so,
as
but
cool.
you're not there for the planet. The planet is the backdrop that
But
helps.
I
tell the
am there
story.
for the cool planet.
But I'm also there to watch Maul cut up Inquisitors.
Yeah, I never got as onto the Maul hype train as a lot of people did, mostly just because I missed it. Really,
Maul is not Maul in the prequel trilogy is nothing. Maul in Clone Wars gets very interesting. Maul in Rebels is awesome.
I know what happened. It does seem a lot more interesting for sure.
And Maul and Obi-Wan's final confrontation on Tatooine is so good.
I've seen that clip.
That's
kind of the thing with me with shows too, is I just don't really I have a hard time with television and shows. They're not with my ADHD, I got very fidgety hands, and if I don't have that's why if I'm doing screen time, I'm playing video games or working on D&D stuff, because I just find movies and television to be just kind of it's not that they're bad, but I get kind of bored watching them. And that's mainly it. Occasionally a show will come along and I'm like, oh, I should check that out. Like Mandalorian, I haven't seen season 3, but I watched the first 2 seasons and that was fun. I'm 3 episodes deep into House of the Dragon, and that is a much better show, I think, than Game of Thrones as far as the representations of the fantasy aspects of that setting, which just get completely overlooked in.
Do you think that's because it's in an earlier age?
I think it's in an earlier age. I also just think that the people who are creating it have a better understanding of the fantasy genre. The guys who made the first show were into it for the personal drama, the HBO stuff,
which is super funny because they're D&D players.
Yeah, well, and the reason they got the rumor is, anyways, the reason George let them make the show is because they guessed correctly who John's real parents were, before it was common knowledge that people knew.
Interesting.
Seems
that's just an odd reason. It seems like an odd reason to give somebody your property.
I think it's whatever. That's why it's a rumor, and I'm sure if it is true, there's more going on there than that. But they did a really good job with the interpersonal stuff, the politicking, and I think one of the really big giveaways in retrospect is the name of the show. A Game of Thrones, that tells you where the emphasis is going to be.
Yeah.
Whereas the books are A Song of Ice and Fire, which is very much a fantasy story name,
Which makes, I do agree. It's
the Game of Thrones. I'm not saying that's bad, because I know the first few seasons of it were award-winning television. But it's too drab in terms of its color palette. It's a very colorful world. It is a setting of romantic fantasy in its aesthetic, which is what makes all of the horrible things that people do. It's that subversion of the trope. It's a world that aesthetically resembles romantic fantasy, but is, in terms of the way people behave, far from romantic fantasy.
Yeah.
And it's a colorful world, and that's why I loved the dragons in House of the Dragon. They all look different. They're all different colors, and they're bright colors. When you have the tourney at the beginning, all of the flags and all of the knights are all dressed up in bright, colorful outfits, and that's what that setting looks like. One of the details about the Game of Thrones show that I can just never forgive them for is they showed everyone Casterly Rock, and it was just a castle. It's a goddamn sea mountain in the books. It's the Rock of Gibraltar that's been hollowed out to make a fucking castle. Come on, guys. And then the whole White Walker debacle, I don't know. They just didn't really do the magic stuff in the fantasy things in the show Game of Thrones, I don't think, very well. They did. They did a lot of things really well. I'm not saying it's bad, but I was not a huge fan of the show either. So. As a fan of the fantasy parts of that world, it really feels very small, and it's a very big world.
Yeah. There's allusions to, again, cosmic horror and
there's straight up a place called Leng.
Yeah. On the map. That's one of those things where I have the map book for that.
Mm-hmm. World of Ice and Fire is great. I love it.
It's absolutely stunning. There's so much out there to look at.
Yeah, I have it right here actually. For people who haven't seen it.
Yeah. Someone gave it to me for Christmas, and it's one of the coolest things I own.
I love this book. This book is so cool.
Well, Mike, where can people find you?
here, and then every other month or whatever in Chaos Scar.
Oh, by the way, last week we did the cart contents.
I got the notification on my phone when the video went up. I haven't watched it for spoilies, but
yeah, it's I will say this, chat was on fire the whole time.
Nice.
So yeah, and then we played we had our other group play last Monday, and that was wild.
Yeah, here and here, Chaos Scar, and then I am thinking about getting started on the streaming thing again. I just got to kind of like mull it over a bit more and kind of have some sort of a plan, because the thing that I didn't like about it is having to do social media promotion. I hate that.
So I'm just gonna make a Twitch, because the thing I was doing before is I was on YouTube, and YouTube is not as good for streaming as Twitch is. So I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to look into like getting set up on Twitch. Well, if you want to do it on your own, you can, but you always know you can do it through Gnome World United as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can just use our Twitch and YouTube stuff.
Sure.
And then you would just have to get a hold of me, and I can hook you up.
Mm-hmm.
James and I can hook you up with our StreamYard.
Yeah, I wonder if we could do something where like I'd run it through my own channel and then share it or whatever through you guys.
Yeah, talk to James about that, but I'm all for it. I'm and the same thing with our StreamYard is like,
yeah, because
I pay the money for this so we can all share it.
Yeah, because there's some games that I think that I would like to do on stream. I'd like to do Elden Ring. I love Elden Ring. I'd like to do Bannerlord. I don't know if people are familiar with Bannerlord. That's a very fun game. It's like a medieval sim, but in a fictional world. It's not a fantasy game. There's no like dragons or anything or magic. It's like regular. It's all just people, but it's like a made up world. And you're just a guy, and you live in this medieval world, and you can become a mercenary or a merchant or a bandit or whatever, and you kind of just work your way up through this feudal society, and you can fight in big battles and siege defenses, and it's a very long form game, and it's very like light on the story, but it's a very cool thing. And then, like, I don't know, just like things like Dead Space and BioShock and stuff like that. Because BioShock, I found the first two games on Steam for like less than $5 a piece.
That's such a good price for that.
And I got both the original version and the remastered versions with that in that.
Ooh, interesting.
So I got 4 games basically, or like 2.5 games for like the price of $10 basically. So that was cool.
I'm been playing. I played it on Friday, and I might play it again for a couple hours here after we're done. I started playing Wildermyth.
I think I've seen. I think
you talk about a story-driven, interesting, like long-term. Like some of my characters are getting old now. And sometimes you do things that increase their retirement age so they get more time.
Oh,
but
cool.
I think they're all in their late 40s now, and there's now younger people who I've recruited. But it's a super interesting game. I mean, it's not going to blow you away visually as far as like if you're a graphics guy.
Yeah,
but it's really interesting. Like the battle's done in like 2D, like your paper.
Interesting.
And a lot of the other stuff looks like watercolor art.
Like the backgrounds and stuff,
but it's also got a little bit like a 4th edition feel to it, as far as like
that's kind of becoming a thing. That's like seems to be sort of the new indie game look. It feels like there's a lot of that kind of like very aesthetically pleasing.
It's very aesthetically
artistic, like painted kind of quality. It seems like in indie games these days, which is cool. There was that period of time in like the late 2000s where like every indie game was pixel art, which like pixel art's cool, but
I love pixel
maybe
art.
not everything should be pixel art though,
for sure.
So yeah, there's some like cool pixel art game. I've never been able to get very far in it because it's hard and I'm not very good at it. Is Hyper Light Drifter. That's a really cool pixel art game.
I have that game.
I have it too. I've only ever gotten through like the first hour of it because it gets really hard.
So like I love games like Space Haven, that it's like wildly deep, Like it's the stuff that can go on in that game is crazy. How deep in you can get into like what happens with characters and their lives and relationships they build with other people on the ships, and your like who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And I find that stuff to be absolutely
Yeah.
fascinating. Wildermyth's got a little bit of that going on as well.
Bannerlord has some of it too, but the thing about Bannerlord, it's part of the Mount and Blade series. It's cool because it has a lot of really cool like role play simulator concepts. The downside is none of them are very deep, so you have to get mods to flesh a lot of them out. Like there's diplomacy, but you can't make alliances.
Really?
You can only and the thing is, it's not a finished game either. So a lot of this stuff is going to get implemented as time goes on. But like it's like you were talking about, you make this character and you age, and like you can get married and have children, and when you die, you become one of your children. And currently my protagonist or my character is like 51, I think. So he's finally got some gray hairs, and his oldest children are all like of the age to start like fighting and governing settlements and things like that. And so I've got this like growing clan, and it's pretty cool. Like a lot of it's like there's a lot of role play elements to it that like the game doesn't just like give to you, that you kind of have to do yourself. But I think that's part of the fun of role play, though, is doing it yourself. Like the game doesn't give you titles, like if you do cool stuff. But like when I got my character is a very well-renowned like general. Like he's won a lot of battles, and so. And like he's from a part of this land called Britannia, which is like Highland Scotland kind of
interesting
vibes. But they were conquered by the Valandians, who are like Norman knights. And so Britannia is now a part of Vlandia. And so as like a minor Britannian noble, I was asked to join the Kingdom of Valandia as one of their barons. And so now I'm like this, and I don't rule all of Britannia, but I rule about half of it on my own as part of like a vassal to Vlandia. So my character is Baron Gwyn, the Bull of Britannia, because he wears a horned helmet and shit. So it's like
I love stuff like that.
Yeah, like the game doesn't give that to you, but my choices through the game made it so that fits, which is cool. It's a cool game that has a lot of really cool like simulator role playing concepts, but they're all pretty shallow. It's like the kiddie pool.
The one thing I'm digging about this, and I haven't had it happen yet, so I'm excited about it, is it's got multiplayer.
Which one?
Wildermyth's got multiplayer.
Oh, you know what? I think I saw that, because I think that's another thing that I've been seeing Jacob and Julia from Drawfee doing on their streaming channel, Secret Sleepover Society. I haven't watched any of it, but I think they've been playing it over there.
Who are you? Who are you? I love Drawfee.
Drawfee is hilarious. I found them a few years ago, and they're great.
Drawfee to me is like just a titch below like McElroy stuff, which is saying a lot.
I've only done clips of McElroy things. I have a hard time with that format of podcast.
Taz, you got to do Taz.
Is that like their tabletop game?
Yeah, but it goes in seasons. So
so like a Dimension 20 kind of format, sort of a thing.
It's less Dimension 20 and more like one of them will go until they've told the story they want to tell, and then sometimes the games are vastly different. Like you go from Balance, which was the first thing, which has got multiple arcs in it, to Amnesty, which is a different game, a modern setting. It's they go from D&D to Monster of the Week.
Oh, cool.
And then there's a short like Western game in there. Then you've got the live shows they do where they just play one shots. And that's where you get stuff like Brendan Lee Mulligan being the DM for Dadlands.
Funny.
Which is a game they made up, which the randomizer is chips inside of a fanny pack. And they're dads of the different dad clans. And that episode is fucking wild.
They're a bunch of goofballs.
There's a whole
I
thing
appreciate
of there's a whole like series of games they did where they're playing Lasers and Feelings, where they're a space country band. Going the first episode, they're going to play at the Space Opry. So I mean, there's just weird stuff. Ethersea one of the best, hands down, one of the best actual play things I've ever. The fact that they made Fit 5e into something unrecognizable as 5e, and then right now they're playing Blades in the Dark for an art called Steeplechase, and it's fucking awesome. It's so good because it's their Blades in the Dark. You know, you're playing kind of underhanded group of thieves. The setting is a giant, like, amusement park that is full of layers, and each layer is a different type of genre.
Oh, sure.
And in between each layers are these criminal undergrounds called the Buttercream, and they're from a layer called Used to Been, which is like a nostalgia layer, and they operate out of an arcade.
The bottom cream.
The Buttercream.
I know, but you make me. There's the Drawfee bit about the bottom cream.
Oh yes,
the nasty bottom cream.
The bottom cream.
The cream of the bottom of the barrel.
I'm Nathan. But yeah, I mean, one of the little arcs in Steeplechase, their goal was to steal the heart of somebody on a dating show.
That's funny.
And it was basically like The Bachelor, which gave us one of the greatest NPCs of all time, Schlebethany.
I haven't gotten to a point yet with my games where I'm ready to start running very silly stuff, but we'll get there, I'm sure.
Blades in the Dark goes from very silly to very like fucked up at times. Like the last one they just finished that I'm caught up on was someone kidnapped Mr. Denton, who's basically runs the amusement parks, and it turns out it was this person known as the Funny Man, who was basically Justin McElroy doing Mark Hamill as the Joker. And because they've run into this person off and on called Deep Dark, who was Justin doing Christian Bale Batman.
Oh God!
So it came down to like them like dealing with this whole thing, but at the end, it turned out that Deep Dark and the Funny Man were pitching an idea to Kendall Denton for a show inside this particular. So by kidnapping him, they were showing that they could do all this stuff, and they tricked the players into being involved in this. And so they thought like, oh shit, we got to say he's going to kill this guy on TV. And it was like, they were just pitching this show the entire time.
Yeah.
So at the end, they were like,
kill him?
Yeah. At the end, they were
That's
like,
funny.
what the actual fuck have you gotten us into? So it was really kind of twisted by the end of it.
Yeah, I haven't been watching a lot of actual plays or like live.
This is this audio podcast, so I just have it on in the background.
Nice. Yeah, that's another thing too that has affected my media consumption. Is I used to be able to do that. I struggle with it more and more to be like trying to think about something and having background noise.
I have to. I cannot do silence.
See, the thing is like. It depends on the day, honestly. Some days I can do it better than others, and it depends on what I'm working on. If I'm working on maps, then yes. But if I'm trying to write stuff, I can't have other people's words coming into my head while I'm trying to make my own words. Even like music will sometimes be too distracting.
So right now, as we're talking, I've got two different Word documents open that I'm typing on. I've got music going.
I can do that. I cannot.
I can't. Like I have to have all that going.
Oh,
or
dude, it's
my brain stagnates.
My greatest trial as a DM is having the sort of ADHD where you get just super single-minded about things. Like I can do one thing at a time and I can do it really fucking good. But if you're trying to get me to do more than one thing, because like I'm much better about it now than I used to be because it's just been a lengthy process, but I still forget about things like lair actions and legendary actions and stuff. It's one of the reasons that I stopped even using the red bad luck cards from those luck card decks is because it's like I forget I have them. And so I just don't ever use them. And it's like, well, rather than just continuously going like, fuck, I forgot to use it, I just am not going to use these.
I mean, it's fair. You got to run the game in a way that's going to be conducive to your players having a good time and you having a good time.
I'm also still very dependent on my notes. I don't do very good. The sessions that I run where I'm improving the most or like making things up on the fly are the ones where I have the least amount of fun because I feel like I'm not.
Lazy prep, man.
See, the thing is, like, I've tried the lazy prep methodology, but it doesn't provide me with enough information. I'm one of those DMs where it's like, for this next plot arc, here are 20 pages of notes for me to remember, and like, the thing is, a lot of it is just the act of writing it out helps me remember it.
Yeah,
it's a big part of it too. Just the act of taking that time. But also, I like spending time on this stuff, so I don't really feel. It's not like a thing where I feel bad.
No, you shouldn't.
Because like there are people that's like, oh, if you've been DMing for X amount of time, you should be able to run a game with just like fuck you. No, everybody's different.
Can, but will it be as fun as it
No.
for me if I did all this prep?
Yeah, and the thing for me is I love my grand fantasy like stories, so I like having lots of spinning plates.
Yeah,
and different like component parts moving at different times, and depending on the two big games that I run, one of them is definitely more like that than the other one, but it's very much inspired by Neverwinter Nights, the original one, where it's like there's the plague in Neverwinter and all this stuff, and so they're like, with that there's a whole conspiracy thing going on below the surface, and so like, but obviously with tabletop versions of games there's more things to consider because there are more things that the players can do. So
infinite option leads.
Yep, having to go like, okay, where I if I had room for one, I would have like a Charlie Day conspiracy board of like all the different people that are involved in this, because like there's the main guys at the top, and then they and there's, because it's one of those things where there's like a coalition of villainous factions, but they all kind of want different things, like they're not all like worshiping the same god or whatever, like there are connections and things binding them together, but like they're still kind of doing different stuff. And so it's like, well, this guy's in charge of everything, but then he's got this fucking like guy over here that is sort of his like right hand, but then there's he's communicating with this guy over here who they're only communicating through him because he's got all this money that gets them these things, and it's like so much stuff. And if I had to improv that, it would be so messy and so bad.
Don't feel bad, man. I
don't feel bad at all.
Yeah, you got to prep for you. That's the key.
Yeah, let's see here.
Happy you will run happier game.
Yeah, before we leave, just to make a note of it, I'm going to change up my screen share here. I have, for this fantasy setting we were talking about earlier, I have 29 pages of notes. And this is all just like world building stuff. This is not prep for sessions.
Oh yeah, I mean,
this is just stuff for me. A lot of this stuff is stuff players will never know.
Yep.
And it just keeps going on and keeps going. So many notes. I made a primer for a game I'm going to start running, a Western Marches style game, funny enough, and it's a 20-page primer. But part of it is I put in a section of it that is like a lore like it's like a little sort of in lore context thing.
Yeah, it's a gazetter. I mean,
yeah, and then like and I put here, I'll pull it up actually. I have it right here. Let me see. Can I switch my screen share? No, it's gonna make me do this again. But I also have like pictures and stuff in it. So part of it is like,
I use that.
It's not just all text. It's not just like a wall of text.
Yep.
I've got little pictures.
Well, that's why, like, for DNO for a long time, I was making supplementary documents like the newspaper in Sigil, and I was making like things that they found and giving it to them. And I've kind of got away from it. I probably need to get back to it. Same thing for Chaos Guard, making the job board.
Mm-hmm.
That stuff's always fun and cool, but it's not always time conducive for me.
Yeah, it can take a lot of time, and if you don't have the resources to do it immediately, it kind of becomes a huge thing.
Sometimes I don't want to do it too.
Especially for like something like if you're only playing remote games, physical props are not as useful, so it's like, do I really need to spend time on this? Or
Super Spike.
Yeah, I'm the same way because I've wanted to do more stuff with physical props, but like you have to have money to spend on stuff for that mostly, or at least in part. Here we go. The guns and stuff in this setting are very like 16th century, and like the mercenary company that the party is like a part of, they are based on the Landsknecht. If you're familiar with those guys, they are like these German, like late Middle Ages, early modern era German mercenaries, and they were known for being extremely flamboyant in their dress and their attire and their weapons and stuff. Because as mercenaries, they didn't own property, they didn't have land or anything, so they wore their wealth on their person, and so they were just these extremely colorful. Just honestly, just like offensively colored. Like there's no uniform in them. They all wore just like super bright colors and stuff. So we're kind of going for like, it's like the old Warhammer, the old world. You know, the Empire. Their aesthetic is based on the Landsknecht. Like the big hats and the feathers and stuff. That's those guys. But yeah. So this is my primer. And like I said, I have like page breaks and stuff in here too, but it's 20 pages. So I'm definitely the sort of person that prefers more notes than fewer notes.
I think, again, like I said, I think it is what it is. And I think if you're satisfied with it, it makes you run the best game you want to run. That's all that matters.
Yeah, no, I'm exactly of the same mind. That's almost sort of why I bring it up, is because there's a lot of silly conversations online about like what good DMs do and what they don't do, and some of it is universal, but a lot of it is very situational and depends on the person and the group.
I think the larger swath of it is universal, but you can boil like prep is universal. You should at least have, like, even if I'm just going to improv the whole thing, I need to have an idea.
Yeah, you need to know exactly. You need to have some little thing to build everything else on. You need the seed at the very
I need
least.
a hook. Yeah, I need something. So, I mean, but I also can do it very meticulously, or I can do it with, just the hook. I just need to, which is best for me in that moment and for the players. I mean, I know that some players just want to kill. They just want to hack and slash. They want to be a beer and pretzels game for that. So I'm not going to invest in a huge story for it. And some players, they want to know everybody in the town. They want to have a relationship with everybody in the town. It's kind of said last Chaos Scar episode you guys were in, I don't think combat happened once.
Nope. We didn't fight time.
Shockingly, everybody was more excited that they never swung a sword afterwards than if you guys would have went in and killed everybody.
Yeah, I mean, because it was just it was more, the encounter was more interesting to do it the way that we did it. The way you set it up for us to engage with.
I gave you an option. You guys took a non-violent option and made it awesome. More awesome than it would have been any way I imagined it.
Yeah, it was. It was a really good time. And it's nice to like break up the combat with more role play heavy sessions and stuff here. That was something that I'm much better prepared for it now, but something that I used to run into a lot early in my first couple of years DMing is that like part of my problem is just in general, I get overly ambitious with the things that I want to do as a creative person, like the scale of stories and stuff. I'm trying to get, one of the reasons I'm doing this Western Marches thing is to get practice at running smaller scale adventures and prepping for smaller scale adventures, because I've never run a one shot that I finished in one go.
It's very, very, very hard to do. Don't feel bad.
It's something that I'm still working on, and just in general, just telling smaller scale stories, whether it's just for fiction or whatever, is just not something that I have an inclination towards. So I'm trying to practice it more, because big grand scale stories are cool, but in order for them to be really compelling and engaging, the small scale stories have to be good too. And so that's what I'm working. That's why I don't like a lot of like modern narrative media, honestly, is because a lot of it is focused on the big stuff and at the cost of the small stuff. You can do both is the thing, you know, like you can have a grand narrative that has good interpersonal character drama, you know, they're not mutually exclusive things, but I feel like being part of like the Saturday morning cartoon generations, I see a lot of those same things carry over into stuff that's marketed towards adults. And it's like, that's a Saturday morning cartoon thing. Like, we need to mature. Like, you don't have to stop liking those things. But if you're in your 30s, if you're in your 30s and still going, Dragon Ball Z is the greatest thing I've ever seen, you need to, your tastes need to mature a little bit. And
I always look at it as like what you like, but at the same time realize there's larger things out there.
Yeah, just
that can expand your.
Yeah, you don't have to abandon those things that you liked as a kid, but you need, if you want to continue to grow as a person, you need to add things to it.
Yeah.
You know, it's like, and so it's like just. We can do both things, you know. We don't, like, fantasy doesn't just have to be the World of Warcraft thing where everything is a spectacle and everything is just there for like a cutscene or whatever. It's like, no, like we can have narrative substance to this as well. It doesn't just have to be about set pieces and cool camera angles.
It can be, you can be whatever you want it to be. If you're doing it and it's your game and that's the story you want to tell, then it needs to be established. Like, I don't want to do that. I want to
I love both. Rule of cool and rule of sense make can exist side by side. They're not mutually exclusive, and it just feels like, again, as somebody who doesn't honestly watch a lot of TV shows and stuff like that, so maybe I'm misreading this.
I think that's fair.
But it feels like a lot of modern media is like one or the other, and
it definitely can be.
It can be both, you know. Like, and I know that obviously when it comes to like TV shows and movies and stuff, there are things like budget and timetables and deadlines and things like that are also big parts of the decision making factors. So it's not an easy answer, but yeah, I like, my goal is to do both things, to have rule of cool, have cool set pieces and spectacles and really just epic looking shit, but also tell a good or memorable character story. Because if your story is about the events, then if it's more about the events than it is about the characters in those events, I think
then you can just
you've taken a misstep somewhere.
Yeah,
because stories only matter so much as they like impact the characters. You know, that's what we remember.
Yeah.
That's what we take with us going forward. You know, is the things that happen to those people. And again, that's another reason why I love A Song of Ice and Fire, is those books are not about the events that are happening to those characters. They are about how those characters are growing and changing in response to things that are happening to them. And that feels way more organic.
That's very true. Yeah.
You know, like the events are important, but it's not like the point of the book is not to get to the White Walkers. The point of the story is what happens to the people until they get here, and like what happens, what's happening to the people, how are they changing, how are these different events affecting their growth, which is why it's such a slow burn. Why I think a lot of people have a hard time with it is because it's not, every single chapter doesn't have like an action in it. Sometimes it's literally just people sitting around talking, and if you're not somebody who can get into that, you're going to have a hard time appreciating that slow burn aspect to it. But I love a slow burn. I love it when it takes ages for a story to pay off, if it's done right. Because when it does, it's like, oh, that's satisfying. That's some satisfying shit right there. I've been waiting for years for that, and it feels good. You know?
Well, you're going to have to come on again, and we can do some. I'd love to see your prep method. You can kind of walk us through what that
Sure, yeah.
So just let me know when something works for you, and we'll get that set up.
I'm free basically every weekend, so I can come on next week if you want.
I think next week we're gonna work on some extra life prep, maybe.
Oh, cool. Oh yeah, I gotta start thinking about that. I didn't do it last year. I gotta do it this year though.
Some extra life prep and maybe setting a date for All Out of Bubblegum. So
nice,
because I've got I'm pretty excited about running that one shot, and I think it's going to be fun.
Mhm.
And then also I want to work some more on The Possibles, which is a game I'm going to run with Worlds in Peril, which is a superhero game. And it's going to be about like, it's overly complicated to explain, I guess. In a short
Some
period of
things are
time.
like that. Like, I don't know where to start.
It's very comic book.
Yeah,
we talked about it like a week ago. So I think we're going to wrap this up, but then I'm going to jump back on here and play some Wildermyth for about an hour and a half.
Fun.
Continue the story we were doing on Friday, because I was playing my other game of it, and I'm like, oh man, I kind of want to go back to the game I was playing on stream, because I'm intrigued to see like decisions I made in my other game have went down one path, and I want to see where decisions I'm making in this game, where they go, because since it's procedurally generated, it's like decisions and everything changes.
That's cool. That's
The
a cool
land-
component for like a story-based game.
Yeah,
Having-
the land is always different. The characters are always different.
That's fun.
It's very RPG heavy. So yeah. Hey everybody, thank you for hanging out. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Mike, as always, for showing up. Thank you, Brian. And of course, thank you, Matthew. Have a good rest of your Sunday. If the weather's good, enjoy it. Otherwise, just go hang out and do something fun. See you next Sunday. Bye.
See you later.